International trade is the first subject we're explaining today on CNN 10. I'm Carl Azuz. Thank you for watching the show. On Monday, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that the United States and Mexico had reached a new agreement on trade. Since 1993, those two countries plus Canada have all been part of a trade deal called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. It was controversial when it was ratified. It's controversial today. NAFTA has impacted thousands of companies and millions of jobs. Analysts say American consumers have benefited by paying lower prices on many of the goods they buy. But American factory workers say they've gotten the short end of the deal with their jobs outsourced to Mexico. A U.S. trade representative has also noted the pros and cons, saying NAFTA has helped American farmers and it's helped the U.S., Canada, and Mexico grow closer. But he adds that at least 700,000 U.S. jobs have been lost because of it. For years, including when he was on the campaign trail, President Trump has criticized NAFTA and promised to either renegotiate it or get the U.S. out of it altogether.
So, just what is it? Well, let's begin with the basics. First, it includes Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. It was proposed in 1992 by these guys, and it was extremely controversial. Critics feared massive job losses, with businesses packing up and moving production to Mexico. Supporters, though, they claimed that it would lead to cheaper goods, and that would lead to economic growth. But NAFTA won out in the end with Congress and then President Clinton ratifying it in 1993.
We are ready to compete, and we can win.
NAFTA is a large, incredibly complicated document, but at its core, it's pretty simple. Before NAFTA, when items were imported, they were taxed. After NAFTA, they weren't. This protects goods made domestically at the expense of consumers, since the tax on foreign products is passed down. Higher tariffs, more expensive goods, less trade. Free trade agreements like NAFTA remove those tariffs, incentivizing trade and lowering costs for consumers. Tariffs were greatly reduced at the start of the agreement in 1994 and totally eliminated by 2008. So what did NAFTA accomplish? It's not easy pinpointing the exact effects that NAFTA has had because there are many factors in how economies function, but since the agreement, U.S. trade amongst Mexico and Canada has tripled. The U.S. trade deficit with Canada and Mexico has increased significantly. But, according to this congressional report, NAFTA actually hasn't had that large an effect on the U.S. economy. NAFTA only increased the U.S. GDP by a few hundredths of a percent because, relative to the size of the total economy, trade with Mexico and Canada isn't that big. So the biggest question of all, how has it affected American jobs? Economists agree there's no simple answer. It's impossible to completely separate the effects NAFTA has had on the economy from other external forces like recessions, currency valuations, technological automation, and overall increases in globalization. Many U.S. manufacturing jobs have moved overseas to countries that America doesn't even have free trade agreements with, like China. Overall, domestic manufacturing has taken a spill. Trade has increased, and goods are cheaper.
So, mixed reactions and mixed results from NAFTA. President Trump says the name itself has a bad connotation, so the U.S. is going to call the New Deal the United States-Mexico Trade Agreement. Negotiations on this have been going on for about a year. During that time, the U.S. has put tariffs or taxes on certain imported goods from Mexico and Canada. And those countries have retaliated with tariffs of their own on American-made goods. And all this happened even though the NAFTA agreement said they wouldn't do it. So the business world, which includes the U.S. stock market, saw the new agreement discussed on Monday as good news. But one big question is still unanswered. What about Canada? Will it also agree to the terms shared by the U.S. and Mexico? President Trump has indicated that he'd want individual deals with each of America's neighbors. But Mexico and Canada have said they want all three countries to be tied into the deal, just like they were in NAFTA. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto said he now wants Canada to be part of the new agreement. A Canadian government spokesperson says his country is, quote, encouraged by the continued optimism shown by the U.S. and Mexico. So while there's hope that Canada will join in, it's not a done deal. There's still some uncertainty about the future of a three-country trade agreement involving the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Last week, we reported on Hurricane Lane's approach to the U.S. state of Hawaii. When a resident of the Big Island was asked about it, he said the wind wasn't bad, but the rain was bad. Between Wednesday afternoon and Sunday morning, more than 51.5 inches of rain fell on part of Hawaii. That made Lane the third wettest tropical cyclone to hit the U.S. since 1950. And on the island of Maui to the northwest, state officials say they responded to at least 10 incidents of landslides and fallen trees. There were also brush fires causing problems there. Still, Lane did not make a direct hit. and the mayor of Honolulu said Hawaii dodged a bullet. At one point, the storm was a Category 5 cyclone, the most powerful on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, but it had weakened as it approached the islands. Flooding was among Hurricane Lane's worst effects.
If you lived in Homestead, Florida in 1992, Andrew is a name you will never forget. Just like in 2005, if you lived in the New Orleans area, Katrina. The military started naming storms after their wives, their girlfriends, but none of these names were made public. So in 1950, everything changed. Several storms formed out in the Atlantic about the same time. It created a lot of confusion. So the U.S. Weather Bureau said, okay, let's start naming storms. And they actually started by using the World War II alphabet. Abel, Baker, Charlie, Dog, Easy. But this created confusion as well because every year the storm names were the same. It wasn't until 1979 that we started alternating male and female names. We recycle that list every 6 years. In the Atlantic Basin, we use English, Spanish, and French names. No storms are named after a particular person. In fact, you can't request a storm to be named after you. That entire process is handled by the World Meteorological Organization. A storm name will be retired if it is too costly or deadly, and it would be inappropriate to use it in future years. In fact, since 1950, there have been nearly 80 storm names retired. And what happens if we go through all of the storm names? Well, it happened in 2005. We ended up going to the Greek alphabet. So that's what's in a name. It took a long time to get here, but just like each individual name, each storm tends to have its own personality.
10-second trivia. What is the name of the first private spacecraft to reach the International Space Station? Falcon, Soyuz, Dragon, or Apollo? Dragon is considered to be the first private spacecraft to do this, though SpaceX, the company that makes it, has received funding from NASA.
This truly is a test pilot's dream, and I'm excited about the whole thing.
The only thing that I can add to that is the importance for me personally to kind of return human spaceflight to the Florida coast, back to the United States. Being able to fly a first flight of a vehicle as a test pilot is a once in a generational type of opportunity.
It's true that some college lectures feel like they last all day. This one took longer. It was a Guinness World Record attempt for the longest continuous college lecture. It started last Friday morning and went on for 30 hours. The associate professor went through Texas history, like all of it, material that he'd usually cover in 14 weeks. At least 10 students had to be there the whole time. They had to stay awake, and no cell phones were allowed. But hey, if you're going to pull an all-nighter, why not make history while you take history? Not sure if there's any extra credit or if that counts as 30 hours of course credit, but of course you got to credit the lecturer for talking up his course and his record. No one needed to be lectured that they'd get something to talk about. I'm Carl Azuz with just 10 minutes of news and puns on CNN 10.